Let's get started. Story number 1.
In the small suburban town of Maplewood, where modern homes bordered acres of dense woods, an abandoned swimming pool sat in the shadows of a forgotten community center. It was 2020, a year when the world seemed to stand still, and people searched for ways to escape their isolation. For Megan Clark, a high school senior stuck in quarantine with her restless younger brother Ethan, the decaying pool became the backdrop for a horror she would never forget. The pool, once a bustling neighborhood attraction, had been closed since 1998 after a tragic accident claimed the life of a young girl. According to local legend, 8-year-old Lily Harper had drowned during a summer swim party when no one noticed her slipping under the water. Her body wasn't found for hours, and by then the pool had already taken on a dark reputation. Whispers of strange occurrences and eerie sightings spread through Maplewood, and the center eventually shut its doors for good. It was now a rotting relic, overrun by weeds and graffiti, the pool itself filled with murky, stagnant water. Parents warned their children to stay away, but in the boredom of lockdown, rules felt less like barriers and more like challenges. One warm evening in June, Megan sat on the back porch scrolling through her phone while Ethan tossed a basketball against the garage. She was tired of the same routine, online classes, social media, and endless video calls. When Ethan dropped the ball and wandered over, his grin told her he was about to suggest something reckless. "Let's check out the old pool," he said, his brown eyes gleaming with mischief. Megan groaned. "Why? It's gross, and we're not supposed to go there." "Because it's creepy. You love creepy stuff." He nudged her arm. "Come on, just for a little while. I'll bet we can take some cool pictures about you've been dying for something interesting to post." He wasn't wrong. Megan had always been drawn to the macabre, devouring horror movies and ghost stories. Still, something about the pool gave her pause. "What if we get caught?" Ethan shrugged. "No one goes there. It'll just be us." Against her better judgment, she grabbed her phone and flashlight. "Fine, but if we get arrested for trespassing, I'm telling Mom it was your idea." The walk to the pool was uneventful, the streets unusually quiet in the evening light. The community center loomed ahead, its windows shattered and doors boarded up. They slipped through a gap in the rusted chain-link fence that surrounded the property and made their way to the pool. The air grew colder as they approached, and Megan noticed how the surrounding trees seemed to lean inward, their branches forming an almost impenetrable canopy. The pool itself was a haunting sight, a wide rectangle of black water, its surface coated with algae and scattered leaves. The diving board hung precariously, its metal frame corroded with rust. Faded warnings painted on the pool's edge were barely legible. "No running. Swim at your own risk." Ethan whistled. "Creepy, huh?" Megan nodded, pulling out her phone to snap a few pictures. The setting sun cast long shadows across the cracked concrete, making the graffiti on the walls seem alive. She felt an inexplicable sense of unease, as though they were being watched. "Let's check it out," Ethan said, heading toward the pool's edge. "Be careful," Megan warned, trailing behind him. Ethan picked up a rock and tossed it into the water. It sank with a hollow plop, the ripples spreading lazily across the surface. "Looks deep." "Don't even think about going in," Megan snapped. "Relax." He smirked. "I just wanted to see how gross it is." As Megan aimed her flashlight at the pool, she thought she saw something move beneath the water, a fleeting shadow that disappeared as quickly as it came. She shook her head, telling herself it was just her imagination. They explored the pool deck for a while, laughing nervously at the graffiti. Ethan climbed onto the diving board, pretending to do a mock dive, while Megan took pictures of the dilapidated surroundings. Despite the eerie atmosphere, nothing unusual happened and Megan began to relax. But then, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the shadows deepened, she heard it. A faint splash. "Ethan, did you hear that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hear what?" She turned toward the pool. The surface of the water was rippling, even though there was no wind. Megan's stomach tightened. "I think we should go." Ethan rolled his eyes. "You're just freaking yourself out. No, seriously. Let's leave." Megan grabbed his arm, but he pulled away. "Just one more minute. I want to see if there's anything cool in the water." He leaned over the edge, peering into the depths. "Ethan, stop," Megan hissed. But before she could pull him back, something surged out of the water, a pale, slender hand. It latched onto Ethan's wrist, yanking him forward. He screamed, flailing as he was dragged toward the pool. Megan lunged, grabbing his other arm. The hand was icy cold, its fingers unnaturally long. Megan pulled with all her strength, but whatever was in the water was stronger. She caught a glimpse of the figure beneath the surface, a young girl with hollow black eyes and matted hair floating around her face. "Let him go," Megan screamed, tears streaming down her cheeks. With one final yank, she managed to pull Ethan free. They stumbled backward, collapsing onto the concrete. The hand disappeared into the water, and the surface stilled as if nothing had happened. Ethan was shaking, his face pale. "What was that?" he stammered. "I don't know," Megan whispered, her voice trembling. "But we're leaving. Now." They sprinted home, not daring to look back. That night, Megan locked her bedroom door and left her flashlight on. Sleep didn't come easily. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the girl's face staring up at her from the water. The next morning, Ethan woke with a strange bruise on his wrist, dark and shaped like fingers. He tried to brush it off, but Megan insisted they tell their parents. Their mother dismissed the story as a prank, warning them to stay away from the pool, but otherwise showing little concern. Megan wasn't satisfied. She began researching the history of the community center, diving into old newspapers and local forums. She learned more about Lily Harper's death and the rumors that followed. According to some accounts, Lily's body hadn't been found in the pool, but instead in the filtration system days later, her limbs twisted unnaturally. People whispered that her spirit never left. As Megan delved deeper, she uncovered other stories, accounts of strange accidents and sightings near the pool. One article mentioned a boy who had fallen in during a dare in 2005. He had survived, but claimed something had tried to pull him under. His family moved away shortly after, refusing to speak of the incident again. Despite her fear, Megan couldn't stay away. She needed answers. Convincing Ethan to stay home, she returned to the pool alone one afternoon, armed with a video camera. The place felt different in the daylight, less intimidating but no less unsettling. She set up the camera at the pool's edge and began speaking, documenting everything she had learned. "I'm here to find out what's really going on," she said, her voice shaky. "If there's anyone here, Lily or anyone else, please show yourself." The water remained still. Megan waited, her nerves fraying with each passing minute. Finally, she picked up a rock and tossed it into the pool. It sank with a soft splash. She leaned over, peering into the depths. A face appeared. Megan screamed, stumbling backward as the girl from before emerged from the water. This time, her lips moved, though no sound came out. Megan's heart pounded as she realized the girl was mouthing a single word: "Help." Before Megan could react, the girl reached for her, but Megan scrambled away just in time. She grabbed her camera and ran, leaving the pool and its horrors behind. Megan never returned to the pool again. She tried to upload the footage to her computer, but the files were corrupted, the screen filled with static and distorted images. Ethan's bruise faded, but both siblings were haunted by nightmares for months. In the end, Megan decided to let the pool keep its secrets. Some mysteries, she realized, were better left unsolved.
Story number 2.
The swimming pool sat at the edge of the forest, a relic from the 1980s when the community center thrived with families and summer laughter. By the time Mia moved into the nearby neighborhood, it had been closed for over a decade. The pool, once a shimmering centerpiece, was now an algae-choked basin surrounded by crumbling concrete. A rusty chain-link fence leaned haphazardly around the perimeter, its no trespassing signs faded and pocked with rust. Mia first heard about the pool from her neighbor, Mrs. Palmer, a weathered woman who had lived in the area for 50 years. "Kids used to vanish there," Mrs. Palmer said one afternoon, clutching her mug of tea with gnarled fingers. 2, maybe 3 over the years. They'd go swimming after dark, thinking no one would catch them. And then, gone. No bodies, no nothing. Mia scoffed, though she felt a chill creep up her spine. "That's just an urban legend, right?" Mrs. Palmer's eyes narrowed. "Believe what you want, but people around here know better than to go near that place." Curiosity gnawed at Mia. As a journalist for a local online magazine, she was always looking for intriguing stories. The swimming pool seemed like the perfect blend of mystery and local folklore. Ignoring Mrs. Palmer's warnings, Mia decided to visit the site that weekend, her camera and notebook in tow. It was late afternoon when Mia arrived. The forest surrounding the pool was dense and eerily quiet, the only sounds the occasional rustle of leaves and distant chirps of birds. The fence was easy to breach. Someone had already cut a hole in the chain link. The metal edges curled outward like jagged teeth. Stepping through, Mia felt an inexplicable heaviness in the air. The pool itself was worse than she'd imagined. Stagnant water covered in a layer of green muck emitted a pungent, swamp-like odor. The diving board sagged at an angle, its supports rotted. Graffiti covered the walls of the small maintenance shed nearby. Crude symbols, names, and messages like "Don't go in" scrawled in red spray paint. Mia started snapping photos, her camera clicking rhythmically. She noticed something odd as she framed a shot of the pool's surface. The muck seemed to ripple, even though there wasn't any breeze. She leaned closer, squinting, when a low splash broke the silence. She froze. "Hello?" she called, her voice sounding unnaturally loud. No answer. The water was still again, but the ripples lingered, moving outward in slow, deliberate waves. Mia told herself it was probably a frog or a fish. Determined to push through her unease, she ventured toward the maintenance shed. Inside, the air was stale, and the faint scent of mildew tickled her nose. The shed was filled with rotting equipment, old nets, rusted tools, and a stack of yellowed papers on a desk. One sheet caught her eye. A maintenance log dated July 1987. "Pool closed indefinitely," it read. Below, someone had scrawled in a different hand, "She won't let them leave." Mia felt a prickle of unease. Who was she? The phrase echoed in her mind as she stepped out of the shed, scanning the area. Shadows lengthened as the sun dipped lower in the sky. She told herself to leave, but something, a morbid sense of curiosity perhaps, drew her back to the pool's edge. She leaned down, peering into the murky water. For a moment, she thought she saw something move beneath the surface, a shadow too large to be a fish. Her breath hitched as the water seemed to clear, revealing the faint outline of a figure just beneath the surface, a child. Mia gasped and stumbled back. When she looked again, the figure was gone. Her rational mind tried to explain it, an optical illusion, a trick of the light, but her instincts screamed otherwise. That night, Mia couldn't shake the image of the child from her mind. She spent hours researching the pool's history, poring over old news articles and records. The stories Mrs. Palmer had told her weren't just rumors. 3 children had indeed gone missing between 1975 and 1989, all last seen playing near the community pool. One article stood out, a tragic drowning in 1974. A lifeguard named Eleanor Harper had been on duty when a young boy slipped into the deep end unnoticed. By the time she realized he was gone, it was too late. The boy's parents blamed Eleanor, and though no charges were filed, she was ostracized by the community. Rumors swirled that she had taken her own life shortly after. Mia's skin prickled as she read. Could Eleanor's spirit be tied to the pool? It seemed absurd, yet she couldn't ignore the unease she'd felt during her visit. The next night, Mia returned to the pool, this time armed with a flashlight and a digital recorder. The forest seemed even darker, the silence oppressive. She stepped through the fence and approached the pool cautiously, her flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. She decided to try an EVP session, something she'd seen paranormal investigators do in documentaries. Holding the recorder steady, she asked, "Is anyone here? Eleanor, are you here?" Silence. She tried again. "What happened to the children?" For a long moment, there was nothing but the hum of cicadas in the distance. Then, faintly, the water began to ripple. Mia's flashlight flickered, casting jagged shadows across the ground. Suddenly, her recorder crackled. A whisper, barely audible, seeped through the static. "Help me." Mia's breath caught. "Who needs help?" she asked, her voice shaking. The whisper came again, clearer this time. "She won't let us go." Mia's flashlight died completely, plunging her into darkness. Panic clawed at her throat as she heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind her. Wet, slapping footsteps, as though someone were walking barefoot across the concrete. She whirled around, fumbling with her flashlight. It flickered back to life, and she caught a glimpse of a figure standing at the pool's edge. A woman in a faded red lifeguard uniform, and her hair dripping and her eyes wide with sorrow. "Eleanor?" Mia whispered. The woman raised a hand, pointing toward the pool. Before Mia could react, an unseen force shoved her forward. She stumbled, her feet sliding on the slick concrete, and she tumbled into the water. The cold was shocking. Mia flailed, her arms cutting through the muck, her lungs burning as she struggled to surface. But something was wrong. Her limbs felt heavy, as though invisible hands were pulling her down. She opened her eyes underwater, and her scream was swallowed by the murk. Faces surrounded her. Children's faces, pale and ghostly, their eyes pleading. Their mouths moved silently, forming the same word over and over, help. Mia kicked harder, breaking the surface with a gasp. She clawed her way to the edge of the pool, her hands trembling as she hauled herself out. Coughing and sputtering, she turned back toward the water. It was calm again, as if nothing had happened. Mia never returned to the pool. She moved out of the neighborhood within weeks, unable to sleep without seeing the children's faces in her dreams. The photos she had taken that first day disappeared from her camera's memory card, as if they'd never existed. She published her story anonymously, framing it as fiction, but she knew the truth. The swimming pool wasn't just a relic of the past, it was a trap, a place where lost souls lingered bound by grief and guilt. Mrs. Palmer's warning echoed in her mind every day. Some places are better left alone. Story the end.
Story number 3.
The old community pool at Crestwood Apartments had been closed for nearly 20 years. Once a lively gathering spot for residents during the summer, it had fallen into disrepair after a tragic accident in the early 2000s. A child had drowned during a crowded pool party, unnoticed until it was too late. His name was Michael, and his story became a cautionary tale for parents and an eerie piece of folklore for the neighborhood. By 2020, the pool was a relic of a bygone era. A high, rusted fence surrounded the cracked concrete deck, and the pool itself had long since been drained, leaving behind a cavernous pit of debris, weeds, and stagnant rainwater that collected after storms. Most residents avoided the area, considering it both unsafe and unsettling. Still, it became a magnet for teenagers looking for a thrill, especially during the monotony of the COVID-19 lockdowns. Laura and her best friend, Amy, had been neighbors at Crestwood for years. Both 17, they were bored out of their minds as the pandemic dragged on. With school fully remote and their usual summer plans canceled, they spent most days lounging around Laura's apartment, scrolling through TikTok and complaining about how nothing interesting ever happened in their town. One late July evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Amy had an idea. "Let's go to the pool," she said, grinning mischievously. Laura glanced up from her phone, frowning. "The old pool? Why?" "Because it's creepy," Amy replied. "Everyone says it's haunted. We should check it out. Maybe film something spooky for TikTok. It'd be fun." Laura hesitated. She'd heard the stories too, whispered by neighbors and passed down from older kids. They said Michael's spirit still lingered there, that you could hear his laughter echoing on quiet nights, or feel an icy hand brush against yours if you got too close to the water. She wasn't sure if she believed in ghosts, but the idea of visiting the pool sent a chill down her spine. "I don't know," she said. "What if we get caught?" Amy rolled her eyes. "Who's gonna catch us? Nobody cares about that place anymore. Come on, don't be such a chicken." Reluctantly, Laura agreed. She grabbed her phone and a flashlight, and the two girls headed out into the warm summer night. The path to the pool was overgrown with weeds, the faint scent of mildew and decaying leaves hanging in the air. The apartments nearest to the pool had long been vacant, their windows boarded up and their doors padlocked. As they approached, the high fence loomed ahead, its gate secured with a rusty chain and padlock. "This is so sketchy," Laura muttered. Amy grinned, pulling a bolt cutter from her bag. "Good thing I came prepared." Laura's eyes widened. "Where did you even get that?" "Don't worry about it," Amy said, snapping the chain with a loud crunch. She pushed the gate open, and it creaked ominously. They stepped inside, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The pool was worse than Laura had imagined. The cracked concrete was littered with broken glass and scraps of metal, and the empty pool itself was a pit of shadows, its walls stained with moss and grime. A shallow puddle of murky water gleamed at the bottom, reflecting the pale light of the moon. "This place is gross," Laura said, wrinkling her nose. Amy ignored her, pulling out her phone. "It's perfect," she said, starting a video. We're at the haunted Crestwood Pool, where little Michael drowned 20 years ago. People say his ghost still haunts this place. Let's see if it's true." Laura shivered, glancing around nervously. The air felt heavy, and the usual hum of insects and distant traffic seemed muted, as though the world was holding its breath. "Come on," Amy said, heading toward the pool's edge. "Let's take a closer look." Laura followed reluctantly, her flashlight beam dancing across the cracked tiles. As they peered into the empty pool, Amy leaned over, trying to get a better shot with her phone. The puddle at the bottom rippled, though there was no breeze. "Did you see that?" Laura whispered. Amy nodded, her excitement growing. "It's probably just a frog or something." Laura wasn't so sure. The ripples seemed deliberate, almost as if something unseen was moving beneath the surface. She stepped back, her heart pounding. "Let's call it a night," she said. "We've got enough footage." Amy sighed. "You're such a buzzkill. Just a few more minutes, okay?" Before Laura could protest, Amy climbed onto the rusted remains of the diving board. It groaned under her weight, and Laura's stomach flipped. "Be careful," she called. Amy laughed, striking a dramatic pose for the camera. "Relax, it's fine." The puddle below rippled again, and this time Laura was certain she saw something, a shadowy shape just beneath the surface. Her breath caught in her throat. "Amy, get down!" she shouted. But it was too late. The diving board snapped with a deafening crack, and Amy tumbled into the pool, landing with a splash in the shallow water below. For a moment, everything was still. Then Amy screamed. Laura scrambled to the edge of the pool, shining her flashlight down. Amy was thrashing in the puddle, her hands clawing at something Laura couldn't see. "Help me," Amy cried, her voice raw with panic. Laura's mind raced. She slid down the sloped wall of the pool, landing in the cold, slimy water. She grabbed Amy's arm and pulled with all her strength, but it felt as though something was holding her friend down. "I can't get out," Amy sobbed, her eyes wide with terror. "Something's got me!" Laura glanced down and froze. A pale, translucent hand was wrapped around Amy's ankle, its fingers impossibly long and thin. It was connected to a figure that seemed to waver like smoke, its face obscured but its presence unmistakably malevolent. "Let her go," Laura screamed, kicking at the hand with all her might. The figure released Amy, and the two girls scrambled out of the pool, slipping and stumbling as they climbed the wall. They collapsed on the concrete, gasping for air. When Laura looked back, the figure was gone, the puddle still and silent once more. They didn't speak as they ran home, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. Amy's ankle bore a faint bruise where the hand had grabbed her, its shape unmistakable. That night, neither of them slept. The next day, Amy swore she would never go near the pool again. Laura couldn't shake the feeling that they had disturbed something that should have been left alone. She spent hours researching the history of the pool, uncovering more stories of strange accidents and sightings that all seemed to point back to Michael's death. The haunting, she realized, wasn't random. It was a cry for attention, a desperate plea from a restless spirit trapped in a place of pain and sorrow. In the weeks that followed, the girls kept their experience to themselves, but the pool haunted their dreams. They heard whispers in the night, faint and indistinct, as though Michael's spirit was calling to them. Laura couldn't shake the guilt that they had only made things worse by going there. One evening, she stood at her bedroom window, staring out at the darkened silhouette of the community center. She whispered a silent apology, hoping somehow that Michael would hear her. The whispers stopped after that, but the memory of the pool remained, a chilling reminder of the dangers of curiosity. Some places, Laura realized, were better left alone.
Story number 4.
The summer of 1990 in Millfield, Ohio was unusually humid, the air so thick you could almost see it. Families flocked to the town's municipal swimming pool to escape the oppressive heat, a glistening oasis surrounded by chain-link fences and rows of picnic tables. It was a place where kids learned to swim, teens showed off their dives, and adults lounged with lemonade and gossip. But by August, the pool had closed abruptly, the gates padlocked, and a hastily written sign taped to the fence, closed until further notice. The reason was whispered about, though the town papers avoided printing the full truth. A 12-year-old boy named Christopher Sanders had drowned during a crowded summer evening. He was a quiet kid, often seen sitting alone at the pool's edge while others played Marco Polo or practiced cannonballs off the diving board. It wasn't just the drowning that had the town shaken. Several witnesses claimed strange things had happened that night. Lights flickering even though it was a clear evening, an inexplicable chill in the air, and, most unsettling, the sound of Christopher's laughter echoing long after he disappeared beneath the water. 2 weeks after the pool was closed, 16-year-old Ellen Marks found herself wandering its perimeter with her friends, Lisa and Dave. The trio had spent the summer biking around town, hanging out at the diner, and finding ways to stave off the monotony of small-town life. But now, with the pool closed and the incident fresh in everyone's minds, the pool had taken on a new allure, a forbidden, eerie landmark begging to be explored. "I heard they're never reopening it," Lisa said, her voice hushed as though speaking too loudly might disturb something. "My mom says the Sanders family is suing the town. I heard his body was stuck in the filter system." Dave added, his tone both gleeful and macabre. Ellen shuddered. "That's disgusting. Don't joke about it." Dave smirked. "Come on, Ellen. It's just a story. They probably just didn't want to admit they didn't have enough lifeguards on duty." Lisa leaned against the fence, peering through the links at the still empty pool. The water had been drained since the accident, leaving behind a basin of cracked tiles and scattered debris. "I dare you to go in," she said, nudging Dave. "Gladly." He hopped the fence with ease, landing with a thud on the other side. He turned to Ellen and Lisa, grinning. "You guys coming?" Lisa followed with less grace, struggling to climb over before dropping down. Ellen hesitated, her stomach twisting. "I don't think this is a good idea." "Don't be such a baby," Lisa called. "It's just an empty pool." Reluctantly, Ellen climbed the fence and joined her friends inside. The air felt cooler, almost unnaturally so, and the silence was deafening. No birds, no distant hum of traffic, just the crunch of their sneakers on concrete. The pool's emptiness was unsettling. Without water, the space felt cavernous, the deep end a yawning pit of shadows. Graffiti had already begun to appear on the walls, spray-painted messages like "Rip Chris" and crude drawings of ghosts. "This place is creepy," Ellen muttered, her voice echoing slightly. "That's the point," Dave said. He walked to the edge of the deep end and peered down. "Imagine how far you'd fall if you jumped in." "Don't," Lisa warned. "You'll break your legs." Dave laughed. "Relax, I'm not that dumb." Ellen wandered to the lifeguard chair, its paint peeling and seat rusted. She climbed up and sat down, scanning the pool as though she might spot something lurking. For a moment, she swore she heard the faint sound of splashing, but when she looked, the pool was still. "Let's go," she said, climbing back down. "This isn't fun." "Don't tell me you're scared," Dave teased, but there was a nervous edge to his voice. Lisa was about to chime in when a loud clang echoed through the pool area. All three froze, their eyes darting around. The sound had come from the deep end. "What was that?" Ellen whispered. Dave picked up a rock and tossed it into the empty pool. It clattered against the tiles, the sound sharp and hollow. Probably just something falling. "From where?" Lisa asked, her voice trembling. "Nothing's moving." Another sound followed, softer this time, like the faint giggle of a child. Ellen's blood ran cold. "Did you hear that?" Lisa grabbed her arm. "We need to leave." Dave hesitated, trying to appear brave, but his bravado faltered. "Yeah, let's go." They turned to climb back over the fence, but the air grew heavier, almost suffocating. The faint scent of chlorine wafted through the area, even though the pool had been drained for weeks. "Do you smell that?" Ellen asked. "Shut up and climb," Lisa snapped, her hands shaking as she gripped the fence. Before they could make it over, a splash echoed from the deep end. All three turned back, their flashlights aimed at the dry basin. Water was pooling at the bottom, impossibly fast, spreading out like a tide. In the center of the growing puddle stood a figure. It was Christopher. He looked exactly as he had in life, thin, with dark hair plastered to his forehead and wearing the same red swim trunks he'd been found in. But his skin was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes were dark voids. He stared up at them, unmoving. "Run!" Ellen screamed, but her feet felt rooted to the ground. Christopher tilted his head as if studying them, then smiled. His mouth stretched unnaturally wide, revealing rows of teeth too sharp and too numerous to be human. He raised one hand and beckoned. The water began to rise, sloshing against the pool walls and spilling onto the deck. the air filled with the deafening roar of rushing water and the sharp, acrid scent of chlorine. Ellen grabbed Lisa's arm, yanking her toward the fence. "Go, go, go!" she shouted. Lisa scrambled over, slipping and cutting her hand on the jagged top. Ellen shoved Dave forward, urging him to climb. The water was at their heels now, ice cold and surging with an impossible force. As Ellen reached the top of the fence, she glanced back. Christopher stood at the edge of the water, his hollow eyes fixed on her. His smile widened, and for a moment she thought she heard him whisper her name. She dropped to the ground on the other side, her knees buckling. Lisa was already running, but Dave stood frozen, staring back at the pool. "Dave, come on!" Ellen screamed. He didn't move. The water surged forward, dragging him back into the pool. He screamed, his hands clawing at the ground as the water swallowed him whole. Ellen lunged for him, but Lisa pulled her back. "We can't help him," Lisa cried, tears streaming down her face. "We have to go." Ellen hesitated, her heart breaking as Dave's screams faded. Then she turned and ran, following Lisa into the night. The police found Dave's body the next morning, floating in the empty pool. The official report called it a tragic accident, another drowning in a pool that should have been off limits. But Ellen and Lisa knew the truth. They didn't speak of it, not to the authorities, not to their families, not even to each other. For years, Ellen was haunted by the memory of Christopher's smile and the sound of Dave's screams. She never returned to the pool, but she heard the stories. People claimed to see ripples in the empty basin, to hear laughter echoing on quiet nights. Some even said they saw a boy in red swim trunks watching from the deep end. By the time the town finally demolished the pool in 1995, its legend was firmly cemented as a cautionary tale. But for Ellen, it was more than a story. It was a reminder that some places should never be disturbed and that the past never truly rests. Story the end.
Story number 5.
It was the summer of 1987 when the Crestwood Country Club's swimming pool earned its reputation as a place of whispered fear. Situated on the outskirts of a small Midwestern town, the club had always been the pride of the community, a sprawling complex of manicured lawns, tennis courts, and a massive Olympic-sized pool that sparkled under the sun. Families gathered there every summer, their laughter mingling with the rhythmic splash of water and the metallic clink of ice in lemonade glasses. But by the time I moved to Crestwood in 1991, no one went near the pool anymore. I'd heard the stories, of course. Every kid in town knew them, and every adult refused to talk about them. It was said that the pool was haunted, cursed by an accident that had happened years before. They claimed that strange things happened there, that people heard voices when the place was empty or saw ripples in the water even when it was perfectly still. A handful of kids whispered that they'd seen something in the water, a shadowy figure just beneath the surface. I didn't believe in ghosts. At 17, I considered myself too old for campfire tales and silly superstitions, but I had a healthy sense of curiosity. And that summer, with nothing better to do, my best friend Lisa and I decided to break into the old pool. It was late July, and the long, lazy days were starting to feel like a weight pressing down on us. Lisa was the daring one, always eager to push boundaries, while I was the cautious type. But even I couldn't resist the allure of solving a mystery that had haunted our town for years. "Are you sure about this?" I asked as we biked down the darkens toward the abandoned country club. "Don't chicken out on me now," Lisa said, her grin catching the glow of a streetlight. "You've been talking about this for weeks." The gates to the club were chained shut, but Lisa had brought bolt cutters. It felt strange, stepping onto the grounds that had once been so lively. The grass was overgrown, the tennis courts cracked and littered with weeds. The pool itself was surrounded by a tall, rusted fence. We climbed over it, landing with a thud on the cracked concrete deck. The smell hit me first, a sharp, metallic tang mixed with the faint, musty scent of stagnant water. The pool had been drained long ago, but rainwater and debris had collected in the deep end, forming a murky, foul-smelling puddle. The diving boards were gone, leaving behind jagged metal stumps. Graffiti covered the walls, most of it crude drawings and curse words, but here and there were messages that made my stomach turn. "Don't look in the water," and "They watch you." "This place is disgusting," I said, brushing cobwebs off my arm. Why would anyone come here? Because it's creepy, Lisa said, pulling out her flashlight. Come on, let's check it out. I followed her hesitantly, my sneakers crunching on the loose gravel and broken tiles. The moonlight cast eerie shadows across the empty pool, making it look even more desolate. Lisa climbed onto the remnants of the lifeguard chair, striking a dramatic pose. Look at me, queen of the haunted pool, she called, her voice echoing. Shut up, I hissed. You're gonna wake someone. Who, the ghosts? She laughed, but it sounded forced. I could tell she was trying to mask her own unease. As she climbed down, we both heard it, a faint splash like something moving in the puddle at the bottom of the pool. We froze, our flashlights trained on the water. The surface rippled, though there was no breeze. Probably a frog, Lisa said, her voice wavering. Yeah, probably, I echoed, though my heart was racing. We were about to leave when Lisa pointed her flashlight toward the opposite end of the pool. What's that? She asked. At first, I didn't see anything. Then I spotted it, a faint, dark shape beneath the water, barely visible. It didn't look like a frog or a piece of debris. It looked like a person. Lisa, I whispered, grabbing her arm. We need to go. But she didn't move. She was staring at the shape, her flashlight trembling in her hand. It's just, there's no way, she stammered. The shape moved, slowly at first, then faster, darting toward the edge of the puddle. It was impossibly fast, like a shadow sliding across the floor. The water churned violently, and for a brief moment we saw it clearly. A pale face breaking the surface, eyes dark and hollow, mouth open in a silent scream. Lisa screamed, and we bolted for the fence. My hands shook as I climbed, the rusted metal cutting into my palms. Lisa was already on the other side, yelling for me to hurry. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see if it was following us. We didn't stop running until we were halfway home, our bikes abandoned somewhere along the way. When we finally collapsed on the curb, gasping for air, Lisa turned to me, her face pale. Did you see it? She whispered. I nodded. What was it? I don't know, she said, but I'm never going back there. We told no one what had happened. Who would believe us? The stories about the haunted pool were just that, stories. But we knew the truth now, and it was something we couldn't explain. A few weeks later, a boy from school went missing. His name was Jeremy, and he was the kind of kid who loved a good dare. Someone said they'd seen him heading toward the country club one night, but no one could confirm it. The police searched the grounds and found nothing, but Lisa and I knew better. We avoided the pool after that, even going out of our way to take different routes home so we wouldn't have to pass it. Years later, I heard that the country club had been sold and the pool filled in with concrete. They built a new community center over it, complete with a smaller, safer pool. People said the new pool was fine, that there was nothing to fear. But I knew better. Sometimes, late at night, I still dream about that pale face in the water and the way it moved impossibly fast toward us. I wake up gasping, the smell of chlorine thick in my nose, and I wonder if it's still there, buried beneath the concrete, waiting for someone else to find it. Story the end.
Story number 6.
The summer of 2003 was supposed to be the perfect summer. My cousin Julie and I had just graduated high school and were spending the break with our grandparents in Westfield, a small town in Indiana where the most exciting thing was the local swimming pool. Westfield Pool had been around since the 1960s and carried that retro charm, turquoise water, chipped white tiles, and a vintage high dive that everyone swore they'd jump off next time. But Westfield Pool had a history, a darker one that most people didn't like to talk about. Back in 1985, a boy named Ethan Miller had drowned there. It was an accident, or so the story went. Ethan had been swimming alone late one summer evening when the lifeguard on duty went inside to grab a soda. By the time she came back, Ethan was gone. His body later found floating at the bottom of the deep end. Ever since then, people said the pool was cursed. Julie didn't believe the stories, and I wasn't sure I did either. But something about the pool always made me uneasy, even in the daytime. The water looked too still, the deep end too dark. Julie thought it was hilarious. "You're such a wimp," she teased one day as we walked there. "It's just a pool, Anna." "Tell that to Ethan," I muttered, trying not to let her see how nervous I was. The pool was surprisingly empty that afternoon. A few kids splashed around in the shallow end, and a group of teenagers sat on lounge chairs, their phones blasting pop songs. Julie and I claimed 2 chairs near the diving boards, close enough to the water to feel the mist when someone cannonballed in. Julie was fearless. She immediately headed for the high dive, climbing up with the confidence of someone who didn't know the meaning of fear. I stayed in the shallow end, wading up to my knees and watching as she executed a near-perfect dive. "Come on, Anna," she called, treading water. "The deep end isn't going to kill you." I forced a laugh. "I'm good here." She rolled her eyes but didn't push me further. Instead, she swam laps while I floated near the edge, letting the sun warm my face. For a moment, everything felt normal, peaceful, and then I saw it. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light. A shadow passed beneath me, faint but unmistakable. I froze, treading water and squinting at the pool floor. The shadow was still there, moving slowly. It was too large to be a fish and too smooth to be debris. "Julie?" I called, my voice shaky. She swam over, annoyed. "What?" "There's something in the water." She looked down and frowned. "It's probably just dirt or algae or something." "No, it's moving." Julie sighed and dove underwater. I watched as she swam toward the shadow, her long legs kicking gracefully. She stayed under for what felt like forever, and I was about to panic when she resurfaced. "There's nothing there," she said, shaking water from her face. I opened my mouth to argue, but before I could speak, the shadow darted away, heading toward the deep end. Julie didn't see it, but I did, and my stomach dropped. The rest of the day passed uneventfully, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That night, as we lay in the guest room at our grandparents' house, I told Julie what I'd seen. "You're overthinking it," she said, scrolling through her phone. Maybe it was a reflection or a cloud or something. It wasn't a reflection. It moved. Julie sighed, setting her phone down. "If it's bothering you that much, we'll go back tomorrow, and I'll prove to you there's nothing to worry about. Deal?" I didn't want to go back, but I nodded. Maybe she was right. Maybe it was nothing. The next afternoon was cloudy and cooler, but we went to the pool anyway. This time, it was almost empty. The lifeguard sat in her chair, lazily twirling a whistle on her finger, and a couple of kids splashed in the shallow end. Julie and I headed straight for the deep end. "Okay, so where's your scary shadow?" Julie teased, standing at the edge of the pool. I hesitated, then pointed. "It was over there, by the middle." She dove in without hesitation, swimming to the spot I'd indicated. I stayed on the edge, my toes curling against the wet concrete. Julie treaded water for a moment, then dove under. I watched her figure disappear into the blue, and that's when I saw it again. The shadow emerged from the corner of the deep end, gliding silently toward her. My heart stopped. It was darker this time, more defined, and it moved with purpose. "Julie!" I screamed. She surfaced, looking annoyed. "What now?" "Get out of the water," I shouted, my voice cracking. She opened her mouth to argue, but then her expression changed. Her eyes widened, and she froze, staring at something behind me. "Anna," she whispered, her voice trembling. "There's something." Before she could finish, she was pulled under. 1 second she was there, and the next she was gone. I screamed, diving into the water without thinking. The cold shock hit me like a slap, but I didn't care. I kicked toward where she disappeared, my arms flailing in the water. "Julie!" I shouted, diving under. The water was darker than it should have been, murky and heavy. I couldn't see her, but I felt something brush against my leg, something cold and smooth. Panic set in, and I surfaced, gasping for air. The lifeguard was blowing her whistle, shouting at me to get out of the pool. I ignored her, diving under again. This time I saw her. Julie was at the bottom of the pool, her arms outstretched, her mouth open in a silent scream. But she wasn't alone. A figure stood beside her, its shape indistinct but human-like. Its eyes were black voids, and its hand was gripping Julie's arm, holding her down. I swam toward her, kicking harder than I ever had in my life. Just as I reached her, the figure looked up at me. Its gaze froze me in place, my lungs burning for air. Somehow, I managed to grab Julie's arm and pull her free. The figure didn't resist, it simply let go, sinking back into the shadows. We broke the surface together, coughing and gasping. The lifeguard helped us out of the pool, yelling something about how we shouldn't have gone into the deep end. I didn't hear her. My entire focus was on Julie, who was shaking violently. We never spoke about what happened that day. Julie refused to go near the pool again, and so did I. A week later, we packed up and went home, leaving the town and the haunted pool behind. I still dream about it sometimes. In my nightmares, I see the figure's black eyes staring at me, unblinking. And every time I wake up, I swear I can hear the faint echo of splashing water. Story the end.
Story number 7.
The summer of 1998 was supposed to be uneventful. I was 16, stuck in a small, sleepy town called Meadow Falls, where the only source of entertainment was an old community swimming pool. The pool was a relic of the 1950s, surrounded by rusting chain-link fences and weathered picnic tables. Its glory days were long gone, but on scorching summer afternoons, it was still the gathering place for kids and teens with nowhere else to go. But the locals had another name for it, the Drowning Pool. The name came from a tragic accident that happened a decade earlier. A girl named Carrie Dunn, a lifeguard just a few years older than me, had drowned there during an evening swim. She'd been alone. Her body discovered floating face down the next morning by the janitor. No one understood how a strong swimmer like Carrie could drown in calm water. Rumors spread. Some said she had a seizure. Others whispered about a freak accident. But over time, the whispers turned darker. People claimed the pool was cursed, that Carrie hadn't been alone that night. By the time I turned 16, the accident was more urban legend than fact, a spooky tale kids told around bonfires. I didn't buy into it. Ghosts weren't real, and curses were just a way to scare kids into behaving. At least, that's what I thought until the night I snuck into the pool with my best friend, Kyle. It was Kyle's idea, of course. He was always the one with wild plans. "Come on, Mia," he said one muggy Friday night. "Let's do something fun for once. We'll sneak into the pool, have it all to ourselves." I hesitated. "You know that place gives me the creeps." Kyle rolled his eyes. "The drowning story? Seriously? That was forever ago. It's just a pool. Unless you're scared." I wasn't about to let him think I was scared, so I agreed. By 10:30 that night, we were climbing the fence, the chain links rattling under our weight. The pool looked eerie under the moonlight, its water still and dark. The lifeguard chairs loomed like silent sentinels, their white paint peeling in the humidity. We dropped our towels by the edge, and Kyle cannonballed into deep end, breaking the perfect stillness with a massive splash. "Come on, Mia," he called, shaking water from his hair. "The water's great!" I dipped my toes in, the water colder than I expected. Reluctantly, I slid in, the shock of the temperature stealing my breath for a moment. But once I started swimming, the chill faded, replaced by the familiar comfort of floating weightlessly. Kyle splashed me, laughing, and I retaliated, chasing him around the pool. For a while, it was fun, almost enough to make me forget the stories, almost. I don't know when the mood shifted. One moment, we were laughing, and the next, the air felt heavy, oppressive. The faint sound of crickets and distant traffic seemed to vanish, replaced by an unnatural silence. I stopped swimming, treading water in the deep end. "Did you feel that?" I asked Kyle, my voice trembling. "Feel what?" he said, though his tone was less confident now. The water around us seemed wrong. It was colder, almost icy, and the faint smell of chlorine was replaced by something metallic, like rusted iron. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the water. That's when I saw it, a ripple, small but deliberate, spread across the surface. There was no wind, no movement to cause it. My heart thudded in my chest. "Kyle, we need to get out." "Don't freak out," he said, though his voice cracked. "It's probably a fish or something." "A fish? In a chlorinated pool?" Kyle didn't answer because, at that moment, the ripple turned into something more. A dark shape moved beneath the surface, circling us. It was faint, almost like a shadow, but it was there. It moved too smoothly, too purposefully. "Get out of the water," I screamed, paddling toward the ladder. Kyle followed, but before we could reach the edge, something brushed against my leg. It was cold and soft, like wet fabric, and it sent a jolt of terror through me. I scrambled onto the ladder, dragging myself out of the pool. Kyle wasn't far behind, but just as he reached the ladder, he stopped. "What's wrong?" I yelled. He didn't answer. His face was pale, his eyes wide as he stared into the water. "There's someone down there," he whispered. I turned to look. At first I didn't see anything, just the dark water. Then, slowly, a figure began to emerge. It wasn't rising to the surface, it was like the water itself was shaping into a human form. It was a girl, her hair flowing around her like seaweed. Her eyes were empty sockets, her mouth open in a silent scream. She floated just beneath the surface, her arms outstretched, reaching for Kyle. "Move," I screamed, grabbing his arm and yanking him out of the pool. He collapsed onto the deck, coughing and shaking. We both stared at the water, but the figure was gone. The pool was calm again, as if nothing had happened. "Did you see her?" Kyle whispered, his voice barely audible. I nodded, unable to speak. My heart was pounding, my hands trembling. Neither of us moved for what felt like hours, afraid that if we looked away, she'd come back. The next day, I told my mom what had happened. I expected her to laugh it off, but instead her face went pale. "Mia," she said quietly, "you shouldn't have gone there." "Why not?" I demanded. "What's really going on with that pool?" She hesitated, then sighed. "It's not just Carrie. There have been other drownings over the years. Too many. And every time, people say they saw something. A girl. But no one knows why." I didn't go back to the pool after that. Kyle didn't either. A few months later, the town filled the pool with dirt, turning it into a skate park. People said it was because the pool wasn't profitable anymore. But I think the town knew the truth. Sometimes I drive past the old lot, now cracked and overgrown with weeds. But even though the pool is gone, I can't shake the feeling that it's not really over. On quiet nights, when the air is still, I swear I can hear the faint sound of splashing water and the soft echo of a girl's voice calling from beneath the surface. Story the end.
Story number 8.
It was the summer of 2020, and the world outside was in chaos. The pandemic had turned daily life upside down, but in my small town of Bellhaven, a sense of eerie quietness hung in the air. My family had just moved into a new house, a sprawling mid-century property tucked into the corner of a secluded cul-de-sac. The main attraction for us, especially in a summer of isolation, was the backyard pool. The pool was massive, surrounded by cracked stone tiles and overgrown hedges. It hadn't been used in years, judging by the faded blue paint peeling from its sides and the faint smell of mildew in the air. Still, my dad had it cleaned and refilled, transforming it into an oasis we could escape to during the long, monotonous days. There was something strange about the pool, though. Its deep end was unnaturally deep, nearly 12 feet, and every time I stood near it, I felt a peculiar chill, even under the blazing sun. The air seemed denser there, and the sunlight didn't reflect off the water like it did in the shallow end. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just the lingering creepiness of an abandoned space. The first time I felt something was off was during my second swim. I was alone, my parents inside, and the late afternoon heat had pushed me into the water. Floating on my back, staring at the sky, I let myself drift toward the deep end without thinking. As I reached the center, I felt an odd sensation, a slight tug at my ankle. It wasn't strong, just enough to make me tread water and glance around. The pool was empty. The water was still. I shook it off as a cramp, paddling back to the shallow end where I felt safer. I didn't tell anyone, mostly because I didn't want to sound ridiculous, but the feeling lingered, like the memory of cold fingers grazing my skin. 2 weeks later, my cousin Ellie came to stay with us. Her parents were dealing with their own chaos, and my mom thought the change of scenery would do her good. Ellie was 3 years younger than me, an energetic 13-year-old who could talk a mile a minute. She loved the pool instantly, spending hours swimming laps or practicing dives off the rickety board. One evening, just after sunset, Ellie begged me to join her for a nighttime swim. "Come on, Mia, it'll be fun." "The water's so warm," I hesitated. The deep end seemed darker at night, its inky blackness swallowing any light from the backyard lamps. But Ellie's excitement was contagious, so I grabbed a towel and followed her out. The water was warm, just as she'd said. The two of us splashed around, laughing and trying to outswim each other. For a while, I forgot about the unease I felt. But then Ellie decided to dive. "Watch this," she called, climbing onto the diving board. The board creaked ominously under her weight, and I held my breath as she leaped, her body slicing cleanly into the water. She didn't resurface right away, which wasn't unusual. Ellie loved to stay underwater to scare me. "Ellie," I called after a few seconds. "Come on, it's not funny." The water remained still. My heart began to race as I waded toward the deep end. Just as I was about to call for my parents, Ellie shot up from the water, gasping. "What's wrong?" I asked, rushing to her. Her face was pale, her wide eyes fixed on mine. Something grabbed me, she whispered. What do you mean? Her voice trembled. I was swimming up, and something pulled me back down. I thought it was you at first, but it was cold. Really cold. A chill ran down my spine. Are you sure? Ellie nodded, her lips quivering. I'm not swimming anymore. Let's go inside. That night, neither of us slept well. Ellie insisted on sleeping in my room, her hands clutching the edge of her blanket like a lifeline. I couldn't shake the image of her frightened face or the growing certainty that something wasn't right with the pool. The next morning, I told my dad about what had happened. He laughed it off, suggesting Ellie had probably gotten tangled in her own fear. Pools can feel creepy at night, he said, brushing off my concern. It's just your imagination. But Ellie and I knew better. Things escalated a week later. It was late, almost midnight, and the house was quiet. I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone when I heard it, a faint splash. My body stiffened. Everyone was asleep. Who would be in the pool? I crept to the window, pulling back the curtain. The pool was still, its surface like black glass. I stared for a moment, about to dismiss the sound as a figment of my imagination, when I saw it. The water rippled. Not like the gentle ripple from a breeze, but a concentrated disturbance, as if something beneath the surface was moving. Slowly, a shadow began to emerge. It wasn't clear, just a dark form shifting beneath the water. My heart pounded as I backed away from the window, slamming the curtain shut. I told myself I was imagining things, but the fear gnawed at me. I stayed up the rest of the night, waiting for another sound. The next day, Ellie and I refused to go near the pool. My dad teased us, saying we were letting ghost stories get to our heads. But we couldn't explain the unease that had settled over us. The pool felt alive in a way that didn't make sense. That evening, while my parents were out, Ellie and I decided to research the property. We sat in the living room with her laptop, digging through old town records and news articles. It didn't take long to find something that made my blood run cold. In 1976, the house's original owners, the Connors family, had suffered a tragedy. Their youngest son, Jeremy, had drowned in the pool. He was only 9 years old. According to the article, his older sister had been babysitting him at the time, and she claimed he'd slipped into the deep end while she was distracted. His body wasn't found until hours later. That's horrible, Ellie whispered, her voice breaking heavy silence. I nodded, staring at the grainy photo of the boy that accompanied the article. His wide grin and messy hair didn't match the image of a restless spirit, but the timing was too eerie to ignore. The final incident happened 3 nights later. It was just past 2 a.m., and I woke to the sound of splashing. Louder this time, almost frantic. Ellie was already sitting up, her face pale in the moonlight. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. I nodded, my stomach twisting in knots. Grabbing my phone, I turned on the flashlight and crept toward the backyard. Ellie followed, clutching my arm. We stopped at the sliding glass door, peering out at the pool. The water was churning violently, as if someone were thrashing around, but no one was there. The pool was empty, yet the disturbance continued, waves crashing against the sides. "We have to stop it," Ellie whispered. "Are you insane?" I hissed. But she was already opening the door, stepping onto the cold stone tiles. I grabbed her arm, trying to pull her back, but she shook me off. "We can't leave it like this," she said, her voice trembling. As she approached the pool, the splashing stopped. The water went still, eerily calm. For a moment, I thought maybe it was over, and then I saw it. A hand, pale, bloated, emerged from the water, gripping the edge of the deep end. Slowly, a figure began to rise, its features obscured by the darkness. Ellie screamed, stumbling back as I yanked her toward the house. We slammed the door shut, locking it and retreating to the safety of the living room. The next morning, my dad found the pool cover shredded, as if something had torn through it. He couldn't explain it, and I didn't try to. We drained the pool that weekend. My parents were annoyed, saying it was a waste of water and money, but Ellie and I knew we couldn't let it stay. As the last of the water drained away, I thought I saw something. A faint outline of a small boy standing in the deep end. But when I blinked, it was gone. To this day, I don't know what we experienced that summer, but I'll never look at a swimming pool the same way again.
Story number 9.
The summer of 2018 was supposed to be quiet, uneventful, a break from the stress of city life. My girlfriend Lily and I had rented a small house on the outskirts of a rural town, nestled in a valley surrounded by dense woods. The house was older but charming, with creaky wooden floors, antique furniture, and a backyard swimming pool that seemed like an oasis in the oppressive heat. When we first arrived, the pool looked neglected. Its water was murky, tinted green with algae, and the tiles around the edges were cracked and faded. Despite its state, there was something oddly mesmerizing about it. The way the sunlight reflected off the surface gave the illusion of depth far beyond what I knew to be true. A pool couldn't be more than 8 feet deep, right? After a few days of scrubbing and chlorine treatments, the pool looked usable again. The crystal clear water was inviting, and by the end of the week, we were swimming daily, letting the cool water wash away the sweltering heat. It became our favorite part of the house, a place to float, relax, and forget about the world. But there was something off about that pool. The first time I noticed it, I was swimming alone late one afternoon. Lily was inside, napping, and I had decided to cool off. The pool was silent except for the gentle sound of ripples as I glided through the water. It was peaceful until I reached the deep end. As I turned, treading water near the middle of the pool, I felt it, a sudden, inexplicable drop in temperature. It was sharp, jarring, like plunging into ice water. I gasped, shivering as I kicked away from the spot. Probably just a weird current, I muttered to myself, swimming back toward the shallow end. But the unease stayed with me, lingering long after I had dried off. That night, Lily brought it up. "Does the pool feel weird to you?" she asked as we sat on the porch, sipping cold drinks under the stars. "Weird how?" I replied, though I already knew what she meant. She hesitated. "The deep end. It feels colder, like something's there, watching." I laughed nervously, trying to brush off her words, but deep down I felt the same. I told myself it was just the nature of old pools, the pipes, or the way water circulated. Nothing more. A week passed without incident, though the pool's presence grew harder to ignore. Whenever I swam alone, I felt uneasy, as though unseen eyes were watching from the shadowy depths. The deep end became a place I avoided, staying closer to the safety of the shallow side. But Lily wasn't as cautious. She loved swimming and often stayed out long after the sun had set, the pool lights casting an ethereal glow on the water. She laughed when I expressed concern, calling me paranoid. "You're letting ghost stories get to you," she teased, floating lazily on an inflatable raft. "There's nothing out here but us." It wasn't until the night of the storm that things changed. The power had gone out around 8 p.m., leaving the house cloaked in darkness. Rain hammered against the roof, and occasional flashes of lightning illuminated the backyard. Lily, ever the adventurer, decided it would be fun to take a nighttime swim despite the storm. "Are you crazy?" I asked as she slipped into her swimsuit. "The storm's getting worse." "It's just rain," she said, grinning. "I'll be fine." Reluctantly, I followed her outside, the warm rain soaking through my clothes. Lily dove into the pool with a graceful splash, the water lit only by the occasional flicker of lightning. I stayed on the edge, arms crossed, watching as she swam laps. Then it happened. She was at the deep end when she stopped, treading water and looking down. "Did you throw something in the pool?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the storm. "No," I called back, confused. "Why?" She didn't respond immediately, her gaze fixed on something below. There's something down here," she said, her voice trembling. Before I could react, she screamed, a raw, primal sound that sent chills down my spine. She thrashed violently as though something had grabbed her, pulling her under. "Lily!" I yelled, diving in without thinking. The water was cold, far colder than it should have been. I swam toward the deep end, my heart racing as I searched for her. The water was murky, impossibly dark, and I couldn't see more than a few inches ahead. I felt something brush past me, something cold, slimy, and unmistakably real. I panicked, resurfacing for air. Lily!" I screamed again, but she didn't answer. Desperate, I dove back down, reaching blindly into the darkness. Finally, I felt her arm. I pulled with all my strength, kicking furiously toward the surface. When we broke through, she was gasping, coughing up water, her eyes wide with terror. It grabbed me," she stammered. "It wouldn't let go." We scrambled out of the pool, collapsing on the wet tiles. Lily clung to me, her body trembling. "Something's wrong with that pool," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "There's something in it." We didn't swim after that. For days, we avoided the backyard altogether, but the pool seemed to call to us, its still surface almost mocking. Late one night, I woke to the sound of splashing. My stomach sank as I realized it was coming from outside. I shook Lily awake and we crept to the window, peering out at the backyard. The pool was rippling violently as though something was thrashing around. But there was no one there. The water churned, waves slapping against the edges before suddenly going still. "Drain it," Lily said the next morning, her voice firm. "We have to drain it." It took hours to pump the water out. As the level dropped, a foul stench filled the air like rotting seaweed and stagnant water. When the last of the water was gone, we saw it. At the very bottom, etched into the concrete, was a large, dark stain. It was roughly the size of a person, its edges blurred, as though it had seeped into the material itself. No amount of scrubbing could remove it. The stain remained, a silent reminder of whatever had claimed the pool as its own. We left the house that summer, cutting our stay short. I didn't care about losing the deposit. I just wanted to get away. Even now, years later, I still dream about that pool. I see its dark, inviting depths, feel the icy grip of something unseen. I don't know what was in there, and I don't want to know. Some places are meant to be left alone.
Story number 10.
It was a sweltering summer in 2019 when my friends and I rented a secluded house on the outskirts of a small town in the Midwest. We were in our mid-20s, craving an escape from the stress of work and daily life. A large, old farmhouse sat on the property, complete with a long, winding driveway and a pool that seemed to be a relic from the past. The house was perfect for our weekend getaway. Isolated, quiet, and full of character. We thought it would be the ideal place to unwind, drink a few beers, and enjoy each other's company. The pool, however, was the first thing that caught my eye. It sat at the back of the house, surrounded by overgrown trees and shrubs, and the faint scent of chlorine wafted in the air. The water was clear, but the tiles along the pool's edge were cracked and chipped, and the pool deck had a layer of dirt that made the whole area feel abandoned. Despite its appearance, the pool had a sort of charm. It felt like it had a story to tell, one of summers long past. I assumed it hadn't been used in a while, and I figured it would be a nice feature for us to lounge by, cooling off under the heat of the sun. The first few days passed without incident. We spent our time swimming, playing music, and barbecuing on the patio. It was exactly what we needed, peaceful, relaxed, and full of laughter. But then, on the fourth night, things began to feel off. We had just finished dinner, and everyone was sitting around the fire pit near the pool, chatting and roasting marshmallows. The evening was warm, the air heavy with the smell of burnt wood and smoke. I couldn't help but feel a strange unease while watching the pool from my seat. It was calm. Too calm. The surface of the water seemed unnaturally still, as though it were holding its breath. I chalked it up to a trick of the light, the way the moon reflected off the water, but then I saw it. At first, I thought it was a trick of the shadows, but as I looked closer, I realized something was moving beneath the surface. It was a slow, undulating motion, like something large was swimming in the deep end. I stood up abruptly, feeling my pulse quicken. "Hey, is anyone else seeing this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. My friend Jason, who had been sitting next to me, turned his head to follow my gaze. "What are you talking about?" "The pool," I said, pointing toward the water. "Something's moving in there." We all fell silent for a moment, the only sound the crackling of the fire. My friends squinted toward the pool, but no one said anything for a long time. Jason shrugged. "It's probably just the wind or something. The trees are close, remember? But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The pool felt like it was holding some kind of secret, and I wasn't sure I wanted to know what it was. I decided to ignore it, convincing myself that my mind was playing tricks on me. The next morning, I woke up to an eerie silence. The house was still, and the sun barely peeking through the trees cast long shadows across the yard. I noticed that the others were still asleep, so I decided to take a swim by myself. The pool looked different in the daylight, more inviting and less menacing. The surface of the water was still, but this time, I didn't feel that odd sense of foreboding that had plagued me the night before. I stripped down to my swim trunks and slipped into the cool water, sighing with relief as it enveloped me. I swam a few laps, enjoying the sensation of being weightless and free. But then, just as I reached the deep end, I felt something. It was a faint tug at my ankle, almost as though someone were holding on. I froze in the water, my heart pounding in my chest. I looked down, expecting to see a branch or debris floating by, but there was nothing. I shook it off, telling myself that it was just a cramp or my imagination running wild. But when I swam back to the shallow end, I noticed something strange. The water was slightly colder in certain spots, especially near the deep end. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make me feel uncomfortable. When I climbed out of the pool, I looked around the backyard, half expecting to see someone watching me. But there was no one. Just the empty, quiet house behind me and the trees stretching out into the distance. That night we sat inside, gathered around the table for a game of cards. The pool was off limits for the time being, but I could still feel the strange pull it had on me. Every so often, I would glance out the window, noticing how dark it seemed near the pool, as though something was lurking just beneath the surface. Around midnight, we decided to go outside for a final round of drinks before heading to bed. The air was thick with humidity, and the night was almost suffocatingly still. As we approached the pool, I noticed something strange. The water was rippling, as though someone were swimming in it, though there was no one in sight. "Are you guys messing with me?" I asked, my voice shaky. "No," Jason replied, his face pale as he looked at the water. "I swear, there's something in there." We all stood there, staring at the pool, waiting for something to happen. It was then that we saw it. A figure emerged from the deep end. At first, it was a vague shape, indistinct in the dim light. But as it slowly rose, I could make out the outline of a person, a man, or perhaps a shadow of one. His body seemed to be made of the water itself, an unnatural, fluid shape that shimmered in the moonlight. He didn't move toward us, but instead stood at the bottom of the pool, staring upward with vacant eyes. I stumbled backward, unable to tear my gaze away. "What the hell is that?" I whispered. But before anyone could respond, the figure sank back into the water, vanishing without a trace. The pool was still again, as if nothing had ever happened. We ran inside, locking the doors behind us and stumbling into the living room. No one spoke for a long time, and the air felt thick with fear. We tried to rationalize what we had seen, but there was no explanation. We all knew what we had witnessed. The next morning, we packed up and left the house without looking back. The pool sat untouched, its surface still and calm, as though it had never held the thing we had seen the night before. To this day, I can't explain what we experienced that night. Was it a trick of the mind, a shared hallucination, or was it something far darker that had been lurking beneath the water, waiting for the right moment to show itself? Whatever it was, I've never looked at a swimming pool the same way again. The house, the pool, and the strange figure in the water all remain a haunting mystery.